Welcome back to the Bullpen Mafia. We have a very special guest here tonight, Glenn Geffner, friend of the program. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on here. I'll formally introduce him here in a second, but as former Marlins fans, Toad and I are really, really excited to have Glenn on here tonight.
Hey, I'm a former Marlins fan also.
You got that. Toad and I formally, we renounced our Marlins fandom.
Yeah, I've moved on to... I don't know which team yet, but I'm switching allegiances in the coming days. We might have to have a high school recruiting ceremony. We'll list out we'll put out 5 hats for me, and I'll have to pick my new team.
So full disclosure here.
Who's got the NIL money?
Yeah. Glenn and I, a couple weeks back, I had the privilege of working with Glenn on a ACC Network extra game, Miami Hurricanes against Bethune-Cookman. Admittedly, it was one of the tougher games I've ever done, color, because it was an absolutely brutal game. Miami, I think, walked or hit by pitch 6 runs in that night and lost to Bethune-Cookman, a program they probably should not be losing to, but got the honor of working alongside Glenn, obviously a veteran of the game, a play-by-play voice for the San Diego Padres, Boston Red Sox, most recently the Florida Marlins for over 15 years. So 30 years in the game. Glenn Geffner, obviously one of the greats, has seen a whole lot of baseball. We thought it would be a fantastic opportunity for the guys of the Bullpen Mafia and our listeners to have the chance to listen to Glenn, hear some of his stories, and have him on and really get to know, pull the curtain on play-by-play in baseball. So Glenn, again, thanks so much for coming on. And Glenn, I think, the first thing we kind of wanted to touch on was Toad and I, Petey as well, we're huge radio listeners. Was there anyone in your past that you sort of emulated, that you really got you into the idea of doing play-by-play? And what was that like growing up? I guess, what did you envision your career looking like? And obviously 30 years later, what it looks like now. Can you just kind of reflect on that?
It's a great question to start with. I'm older than you guys. I'm 55 years old. So I grew up in South Florida in the 70s and 80s. We didn't have a major league team down here.
Yeah.
Well, we had, and you didn't have every game on TV or on your phone like you have now either. We had the game of the week on NBC on Saturday afternoons. You had Monday Night Baseball on ABC, and every Tuesday night, Channel 6 of Miami would carry the Yankees game. So most of my baseball growing up was listening to the radio, because WIOD in Miami used to carry all the Yankees games, every single game of the season. And occasionally they'd have an Orioles game or a Red Sox game. But I grew up listening to baseball on the radio, listening in those years to Phil Rizzuto, who maybe wasn't the best guy to emulate, but Bill White and Frank Messer. And I love those guys. I love listening to them. And that's where my passion for radio was born, hearing these guys paint a picture. So I could be falling asleep in my bedroom in South Dade, and I could picture the first pitch in Anaheim, California, when the Yankees are playing the Angels. I could get a feel for what the ballpark looked like, what the left-handed hitter standing deep in the box looked like. And that's where my passion for broadcasting began, and really my passion for radio. When I went away to college, at that time, getting into play-by-play broadcasting didn't seem very attainable. We didn't have, in those years, broadcasting classes you could take in high school, or a TV station, a radio station in high school. So I went to Northwestern, just outside of Chicago, and studied journalism. My dream when I went to school was to maybe write for Sports Illustrated, which at that time was the biggest thing going, and to cover Major League Baseball for SI. As soon as I realized very early on I was never going to get to the big leagues as a player, I thought maybe there's a way to get there as a writer.
Love it.
But when I was very young growing up, falling in love with baseball, I collected baseball cards. I watched everything I could. I read everything I could. I listened to everything I could. And I would go in my bedroom at age 7, at age 8, and literally turn down the volume on a game and broadcast the game.
Wow.
If the Red Sox are playing the Yankees, I get my Red Sox cards out on one side, my Yankees cards on the other side. So I'd have statistics for every player. And I'd broadcast the games in my bedroom. So I got to Northwestern freshman year, and during New Student Week, I saw ads up that WNUR Sports, the student radio station sports firm, was looking to hire people. So I went in for an audition. I figured, hey, I've called World Series games already, and I'm just starting my freshman year in college. And I auditioned, and I earned a spot. And over the course of those 4 years, got to do baseball, men's and women's basketball, football. Didn't win a lot of games at Northwestern in those years, but really got the bug, and was able to start in AAA right out of college, initially as an unpaid intern, but worked my way up to the full-time PR director, doing the broadcasting. So my thing was, when you asked, this is a long way to get to your original question, was there a specific voice I listened to? In baseball, not really. growing up in Miami, some folks older than you guys might remember Rick Weaver, who was the voice of the Dolphins. Sonny Hirsch called the Canes games.
Yeah.
Rick Weaver also did the Fort Lauderdale Strikers in those years. I listened to those guys and their passion. I even have a one phrase that I use on radio for baseball all the time that I think I borrow as an homage to Sonny Hirsch. If the Marlins were going to the bottom of the ninth or to the ninth inning trailing, we head to the ninth. Last call for the Marlins. It's the Dodgers 7 and the Marlins 5, whatever it was. But that was, I'm pretty sure, a Sonny Hirsch thing. And I have little things like that I've used over the years that are in homage to different broadcasters who I've liked. So there wasn't that one guy. Then I got to Rochester in AAA right out of school. All of a sudden, I've got friends all around the country. And I sent, in those days, cassette tapes to a friend in LA, a friend in Minnesota, a friend in St. Louis, a friend in Cincinnati. Hey, can you record your hometown play-by-play guy and send it to me so I can listen to different voices? That was before XM. That was before you could listen to every game on your phone.
Before the internet.
A lot of different voices. Before the internet. Exactly. Very true. Thanks for making me feel even older.
That was Toad.
Yeah. No, I know. But I'm keeping score here, so I know. But at the end of the day, I didn't listen to those voices to steal things from people, but to hear different styles, things that I like, maybe things that I didn't like, and you find yourself incorporating all of that stuff. And when you go out and you get the experience, you try things that work, that don't work, what you're comfortable with, what kind of style you're comfortable with, maybe uncomfortable. Some things work, some things don't. And so really, it's kind of an amalgamation of a lot of voices I've heard over the years. And as time went on, you talked about 3 decades, you kind of develop your own style.
That's so cool, Glenn. And when you said last call for the Marlins, that was
Flashbacks.
Like, I know Toad and I both looked at each other like, I've heard that before.
4.5 innings in the books were halfway home. I think that also might have been a Sonny Hirsch thing. And the other one, and I'm not sure if this was Sonny, but when the Marlins were winning going into the final inning, time to hold them and go home was something I would always say. And I started that working in AAA and
That's
using
amazing.
San Diego, using in Boston and in Miami. And I think those were all Sonny Hirsch-isms, but I'm not positive.
They're Geff-isms now. Come on now.
Exactly right.
Glenn, I mean, Petey and I both minor league veterans, Grizzly veterans in the minors, and you talked about working in Rochester. The minor league journey for broadcasters is difficult now, right? I mean, that's not an easy journey. I mean, we've been around organizations where it's guys are sort of paying their dues, trying to make their way up to the major league. So can you talk a little bit about those years in Rochester, how they prepared you for San Diego, eventually, finally culminating in, working in play-by-play?
I wouldn't have traded 1 minute I spent in the minor leagues, not 1 minute. To this day, some of my closest friends, including my wife, are people I met in Rochester in the 5 years that I was there.
Wow.
I mentioned I started out as an unpaid intern. I made money to pay my bills, $25 a pop, making mascot appearances as R.W. Homer, this giant baseball that wore a hat. You know what? Hold on a second.
You got the bobblehead or what?
Break out the archive.
No, I do have a picture.
I love it.
It's not far. I don't know what you can see. This was me as R.W. Homer in 1990. And the funny thing is, in this picture, R.W.'s not wearing big red clown shoes that he wore 99% of the time.
Wow.
But what kids in the old 1927 ballpark realized was if you got R.W. Homer at the very top of the ballpark, at the top of the ramp, it gave him a little bit of a shove. He would just roll all the way down.
Oh my
So
God.
it just chain link fence.
That's awesome.
So I spent a lot of that summer black and blue, but I wouldn't trade a second of that. I would not trade a second of pulling the tarp, of doing sales like we all have to do, of making appearances in the community. That was all part of it. And the other thing about broadcasting college, broadcasting the minor leagues, you're going to make mistakes, and that's the place to make those mistakes. And
true.
It's no different than being a player.
Right.
You show up in rookie ball, you make mistakes, you learn from them, you climb the ladder, you hope you make fewer mistakes. So my path wasn't traditional, and maybe there's not a traditional path necessarily, but I initially got to the big leagues as a PR guy, and then I started filling in on the broadcasting because of the experience I had. But I didn't go A-ball, AA, AAA, big leagues as a broadcaster. There are literally, I left Rochester at the end of the 1996 season. There are literally people broadcasting in the International League today who were broadcasting in the International League when I left in 1996.
Wow.
And they've given up on the dream. They love where they are. They're happy doing what they're doing. They're institutions in their hometowns.
Yeah.
And that's great. And I'll tell you what, I had 26 years in the big leagues, 5 in Rochester, 31 total. But there were a lot of those days over 26 years where I missed a lot of life in the minor leagues. I know you guys can relate to those things, and maybe not in the moment as you're going through them. And when you want to get to Milwaukee, or I wanted to get, to the big leagues, wherever, I think one thing that I was really good at was savoring where I was. They talk about be where your feet are, and really not looking too far ahead, not spending every day in AAA trying to figure out how I'm going to get to the big leagues, but really immersing myself in what I was doing at that moment. And for those reasons, I had a blast. And actually, I turned down 2 major league jobs, PR jobs, not broadcasting jobs, but I turned down 2 major league jobs to stay in Rochester over the course of 2 years. And then finally, the last year in Rochester, I met my wife, so it worked out. And then I had a third chance, and I finally went to the big leagues that third time. But I had a blast, and I'd go back. I really would, because those years were really special.
That's awesome.
That's such a cool story. And, you said something about the minor leagues, and I think Petey and I'd be remiss. We had some fantastic play-by-play guys throughout our journey at the Brewers organization. It was so cool to just see their journey, right? It sort of parallels the minor league baseball players' journey, where again, they're just waiting for their opportunity. And to your point, some folks are just happy where they are. It's a fantastic parallel when you start it. They ride the bus with us, right? They have their own seat with their laptops, right? So
they're on the bus,
right? Yep. They experience just the same stuff that a player would.
Same grind.
In my day, getting the same. In my day, was $12 per diem. I hope it's gotten better over the years.
It's like marginally.
It's 13 now, Glenn. It's 13. So
it covers one Chipotle bowl a day.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Such a joke.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so Glenn,
but I wouldn't have traded a minute of that in retrospect.
Right. So Glenn, you finally get your opportunity with the Padres. What was that like? Because you joined the Padres organization. I know you and I talked about it a little bit off air when we were broadcasting together, but 1998, they played in the World Series against the New York Yankees. What was that like? That was your first gig in the major leagues, right? So right out of the gate, you're in a National League pennant winning team.
Well, I got there at the end of '96, so I was there. '97 was my first full season in San Diego, and '98 was a remarkable season on so many levels. Winning the pennant, going to the World Series against the Yankees, beating 200-win teams in the playoffs. Randy Johnson's Astros, then Maddox, Smoltz, and Glavine with the Braves. 2 series nobody thought the Padres would win, but that team had Tony Gwynn on it, and it had Trevor Hoffman on it, and it had a lot of guys. A couple who were in Cooperstown, had a Hall of Fame manager in Bruce Bochy, and a lot of other guys who not even necessarily had career years, but just fit so well together. When you think about Wally Joyner at first base, Kilvio Veras at second, Chris Gomez, maybe not a household name, was a terrific shortstop. Ken Caminetti was at third base and won the MVP 2 years earlier. Steve Finley was in center field in that team. Carlos Hernandez was the catcher. You had Gwynn and Wright, and kind of a revolving door a little bit over parts of that year. Greg Vaughn was in left field most of the time, but missed some time with injury. He had 50 home runs that year, so he was in left field a lot. But it was a really special team. And Kevin Brown leading the rotation. And Dave Stewart was our pitching coach that year. It was remarkable. With just a great coaching staff, and you guys understand the importance of having a great coaching staff. Guys, again, who aren't household names, but Rob Peachlow, Tim Flannery, Davey Lopes, who just
the glue guys
played in the big league.
Yeah.
They're glue guys. Like you guys haven't been glue guys. They were glue guys. And it was such a fun season. And it was at a time when San Diego, in November of '98, there was a referendum on the ballot. Will the voters approve the construction of Petco Park? It was a public-private partnership between the team and the city. And so we really needed to have a good year and get the city excited about the Padres in '98. They went all the way to the World Series. And even getting swept by the Yankees in that World Series, I can't imagine being more excited winning the World Series than the way people felt at the end of that year. It's such a magic carpet ride. And then that November got 60% of the vote to approve the construction of Petco Park. And think about getting 60% of people to vote for anything. Even a few years ago, it was pretty impressive. And so that season led to Petco Park and everything that's happened around there. I know was it Toad? You talked about San Diego and loving the vibe down there.
Yeah. I'm actually really glad you brought up Petco Park because I have a bone to pick with Javi. And actually, our listeners and Instagram followers have an issue with Javi. We had him rank his top 5 ballparks, and somehow the Trop was number 3 because because they had Dippin' Dots. So I wanted to ask you if you have your. We'll switch it up a little bit. Maybe if you could tell us your top 3 press box amenities. I know
press box amenities.
Yeah, I know Marlins Park has they're like McDonald's. It's the ice cream machine that never works.
Yeah, right.
I haven't been to many major league press boxes, but some NFL stadiums have like the chili dogs every game. So your top 3 MLB press box amenities.
Philadelphia has legendary ice cream in the press dining room in Philly. They're known for that. Free Dodger dogs in the 7th inning at Dodger Stadium. That's pretty popular. Although I know you guys have debated Dodger dogs and Fenway Franks a little bit. I'm a Fenway Frank guy, but it's got to be the grilled Fenway Frank, not just the boiled.
Don't pump Petey's tires, Glenn.
Come on, Glenn. Come on, Geff. Keep it going, baby.
You got to get the grilled Fenway Frank, and it's way up, and it's just off to the first base side of home plate. It's very close to the press box. You got to get the grilled Fenway Frank, those are the 2. I'm a big diner. I like to go downstairs. The game starts at 7:10. We go on there at 6:40. Around 5:45, I like to go downstairs. You just got to get a feel for the vibe in every ballpark I'm in. And part of that was grabbing some food. So I would eat in every ballpark every night, not in the press box, but I walk around and find whatever the staples are. And I love doing that. And there are a lot of foods I can think of at different ballparks that really stood out. But, the first 2 that come to mind when you talk about press box specific are the Dodger dogs and the ice cream in Philly.
Respect. Fair enough. And do you notice what he said? It's ice cream in Philly, not Dippin' Dots.
Not Dippin' Dots. What is
I've caught a lot of heat. During the last couple of days. Not only from
I like
BC,
a good Dippin' Dot.
I love Dippin' Dots. So, Glenn,
the Trop's not the only park that has them.
No, not anymore. We were at the Marlins game the other night. I made Javi take a picture in front of the Dippin' Dots guy.
That was awesome.
Oh man, that's good stuff. So Glenn, you have this tremendous year in San Diego, and Toad kicked us off track here. Toad's a good. He's keeping us on our toes, but you have this tremendous run in San Diego, and then you switch gears and ship over to Boston, right? You saw what I did there, Petey. Ship over to Boston, right?
No, Javi, shipping up to Boston.
Drop Murphy.
That's right.
So Glenn, you go from one tremendous near World Series run, and you find yourself in Boston, where 03 and 04 were really spectacular years, and Petey lived that. So I know Petey had some questions that he wanted to sort of pepper you with about those Red Sox years.
Yeah. So
how old were you in 03 and 04, Petey?
So I was 16 and 17. I mean, I'll never forget it either, just because, and I'm sure, Glenn, obviously, like in your situation too, right? Like you're coming in there, Joe Castiglione is there, right? As sort of the voice at the time. So when you came in 03, was that when you came into the VP of Communications? Is that how you started out? Okay.
I was the head of PR initially, and then finished up my later years there working with Joe Castiglione. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So like you said, you came on. I don't even know if we were recording yet, but you brought up 03. I hope we weren't recording it yet because I didn't want to think about it. The Aaron Boone home run. The fact that we still got to see Aaron Boone all over the television when you watch the Yankees games. But so 04, everyone knows the 86-year curse. Obviously, they break it. Glenn, just break down from a Red Sox fan's perspective that's watching it on TV with his family and, has parents, grandparents, getting emotional, right? Because they've seen it all. They've gone through this. What was it like from your perspective as somebody who's with that team every day, that's seen it all, that saw what happened in 03, rolls into 04, they finally break the curse? What was that like?
And you made an important point. You got to start with 03 because 04 would have been special, but not as special if 03 hadn't ended the way that it did.
Yep.
And that was game 7 of the ALCS at Yankee Stadium, the 11th inning. Tim Wakefield on the mound. Aaron Boone hits the walk-off home run. Yep. And absolute devastation. Absolute devastation.
Yep.
And so then you bring in Kurt Schilling in the offseason. You bring in Keith Folk in the offseason. And things start to build in 04. There are certain dates that are emblazoned in my memory. July 24th, 2004, the Yankees were at Fenway. It was a Saturday afternoon game. It's supposed to be on Fox. A ton of rain in Boston that morning, and the Red Sox were scuffling. The Yankees were playing really well, and the Red Sox were ready to bang the game. They're, let's just not play today. And a bunch of the players went into Terry Francona's office and said, no, we're going to find a way to play this game today. We want to play this game today. And they got the game played. and Bill Miller wound up hitting a walk-off home run off of Mariano Rivera to win that game. That was the game with Varitek and that was the fight. Varitek and A-Rod.
Yep.
And then Bill Miller winds up winning the game with a walk-off home run, and that was the moment that everything changed. Wow. And from there, the Red Sox caught fire. It was a great postseason, and then you get into the ALCS against the Yankees, go down 3-0. Not only do you lose the first 3, but you lose game 3 at Fenway 19-8.
Yes.
Get absolutely embarrassed.
Yep.
And, nobody in history has ever come back from a 3-0 deficit in a postseason series. And Big Papi took over game 4, game 5. Then he's still, it's 3-2, but now you got to go back to Yankee Stadium.
Yep.
Win game 6, blow them out in game 7. Johnny Damon hits the grand slam off Kevin Brown.
Yep.
And here's the thing. This is what people forget. It's kind of like the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. Everybody remembers them beating the Soviet Union.
Right.
That didn't get them the gold medal. They still had to come back a couple of days later and beat Finland. Otherwise, beating the Soviets wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
The Red Sox had to come back and beat the Cardinals in the World Series, and that was a really good Cardinals team.
Right? Yeah.
Think about, and the Red Sox never trailed from an inning in that series. Think back to 2003 when the Yankees had that great win against the Red Sox. They lost the World Series to the Marlins.
Right.
And a lot of people tell you it was kind of a letdown after the drama of the Red Sox series. And somehow the Red Sox were able to go into St. Louis, and just kick their tail. 4 straight, the first 2 at Fenway, the last 2 in St. Louis. And my most vivid memory of that entire season probably comes from that night, October 27th, 2004, when the Red Sox won the World Series in St. Louis. And you talked about parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. Thousands and thousands of Red Sox fans had come to St. Louis, and most of them could not get a ticket to the game. But late in the game, when it was apparent the Red Sox were going to win, the Cardinals opened the gates and let all these people in so they could be in the ballpark when the Red Sox finally win the World Series for the first time in 86 years since 1918. And it felt like you were at Fenway. And I was in the press box for almost the entire game, but I was in the dugout right behind Terry Francona for the bottom of the 9th inning. And you could just feel it. And then everybody pours out onto the field when it ends. But there were so many Red Sox fans, and people literally stayed in that park probably for a couple of hours.
Wow.
We wound up, there was a big celebration in the ballpark, went back to the hotel. Everybody got cleaned up, changed. And then we flew back to Boston all night, landed in Boston at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, right in the middle of rush hour in Boston. And you had people like hanging off of overpasses and helicopters overhead, live news coverage of the Red Sox coming back. It was pretty special. And then the parade with, depending on who you ask, 2 million, 4 million, 6 million people on land on the Charles River with the duck boats. It was magic. And to go through a season like that in a city like that, where it's not just about Boston, just about Massachusetts, it's New England, and it's such a national and international fan base with the Red Sox. And to have the characters you had in that team, guys like Pedro and Manny and Kevin Millar, Big Papi, Johnny Damon, you can go on and on. It was special. I could have walked away from baseball at the end of 2004 and have had a pretty good life in baseball, but kept going and had some more good times after that.
And Glenn, that was going to be my next question for you too. Is obviously, like you said, there's so many different characters, so many different personalities on that 2004 team. If you had to pick one guy that you enjoyed being around or covering the most, or sort of dealing with from that team, and that could be a very difficult question, but who do you think that would be?
It is difficult, but I'm going to say the first name that comes to mind is Kevin Millar.
Yeah,
Millar had come over in 2003, and nobody really knew who this guy was. He had been with the Marlins, and he left the Marlins to go play in Japan. And somehow the Red Sox worked something out to get him to come back from Japan and to play for the Marlins, or play for the Red Sox, rather. And he was not a star player. He wasn't a Papi. He wasn't a Manny. He wasn't a Pedro kind of star.
The ultimate glue guy.
Yeah, he was.
I was just going to say, you guys talk about glue guys. He was the ultimate glue guy.
Cowboy
on good
up.
days, on bad days, Cowboy up. Cowboy up was 2003. The Idiots were 2004.
The Idiots were 2004. Yeah, long hair.
And he was as big an idiot as anybody. But that was Kevin Millar. Just the nicest guy in the world. And
that's awesome.
And I like to think I was one of the first people who talked about getting into broadcasting. And I had actually, early in my time in Miami, he was still playing. He was with the Blue Jays, I think, at the very end of his career. He's with the Orioles a little bit. I think the Blue Jays at the end. And I said, you got to get into broadcasting. I said, one day I would love to work with you, bring you back to South Florida. You were very popular with the Marlins. Then he got his MLB Network gig, and he hasn't looked back. But he was the guy. He was the glue guy.
That's awesome.
When Manny Ramirez would do something idiotic, when the media would be all over Manny, when there'd be a lot of tension, Millar always knew just the right thing to say. He'd do something to embarrass himself that would take the attention off of Manny. But you need guys like that. You guys, you've been in clubhouses. You know what that's all about.
Absolutely. You need that.
He had a lot of home runs, had big hits, but he also did so much behind the scenes. He was a special guy.
So cool. Glenn, I think, you'd never, like, that's all stuff you never see on a stat sheet, right? Like, no one really could understand the value of a Kevin Millar. That's why, Petey, Toad, and we always talk about, the intricacy of a clubhouse is it's so special, and it's so fragile sometimes, right? Like, you talk about this tension, especially in Boston. It's such a media heavy market, and to have a guy like that's willing to not necessarily be the village idiot, but understand his role and not overplay his hand, just want to be the sort of the release valve for that team. That's so cool. So cool to hear from.
And you think about 2004, Nomar was traded at the deadline that year. Yeah. So at the end of Nomar's time in Boston was very uncomfortable and very awkward and not good with the media. And there were pockets of the 04 season where Pedro wasn't talking to the media at all. And Manny had his things. But through all of that, Millar kept everybody together and kept the media satisfied and kept his teammates satisfied. And somehow it all worked out in the end.
It's awesome. Great stories, Glenn. That's just great insight. Really cool. Love that little tidbit about them letting the Red Sox fans in 04. That's so cool.
Yeah.
What a feel.
I know.
Unreal.
Glenn, you're getting chills. I'm getting tears. I'm getting everything here. I'm feeling it all. It's getting hot down here. Yeah.
But now I want to hear your story. Watching the final out of Game 4 in 07, or 04 rather, where were you?
Yeah, so 04, I remember we were down in my basement. I had about probably 5 or 6 of my high school buddies over. But for the 9th inning, I had gone upstairs because my dad was upstairs at the time, and I think my dad was there, my grandfather was there. Like, I just had to be with them because I knew how much it sort of had meant to them. So remember going upstairs with them, jumping up and down, going crazy. 16, 17 years old. So I wasn't drinking or anything like that, but I think we were, might have popped a bottle of champagne or something out there on the lawn. I think we put the lights on out there. We were playing wiffle ball that night. I don't remember going to sleep that night. It was a really cool little celebration we had.
And you mentioned the generations, and look, some team wins the World Series every single year, and every one is special.
Yep.
But there are a few that are extra special. The Cubs winning was extra special. The Red Sox winning was extra special. And I don't know if you remember this, but back in the day when Sports Illustrated was really big, they'd always have the Sportsman of the Year, and it was a huge deal. And Tom Verducci made Red Sox Nation the Sportsman of the Year.
I remember
and Tom
that.
Verducci, a great baseball writer.
Yep.
He came to Boston for a couple of weeks. And actually, in my role heading PR, I worked with him. He was looking for every amazing story about Red Sox fans and how they celebrated and what it meant, and people going to their parents or grandparents' tombstones in the middle of the night and having a toast or putting down a Red Sox pennant. And again, I'm getting chills thinking about this stuff, and it's been 20 years now, but it was really special. And again, when any team wins, it's special, but this was extra special. And as somebody who grew up in New England, and I guess you still live in New England now, you know what the Red Sox have meant up there, and especially in 2004, after all the history. And everybody knows, what happened in the 40s, what happened in 67 and 75 and 86, and then 03. To do it in 04 was really extra special.
It really was. That's
2003 was a good year.
So enough with the whole.
Well, man, of course, Geff's favorite Red Sox is the guy who kind of he connects everything together here. But before we get into the Marlins talk and what's going on down here in South Florida, Geff, I wanted to ask and get your opinion on something trending that's been in baseball broadcasts lately. I rarely watch, pardon the interruption, anymore, but a clip, something Michael Wilbon said earlier this week went viral about how he's irritated, and I'm paraphrasing here, he's irritated with the obsession with higher analytics, things like exit velo off the bat, is cheapening broadcasts. Like there's not much creativity left anymore. And these broadcasters are relying so heavily on the higher analytics that are provided to them, in an instant. I wanted to get your perspective on that as someone who's worked in radio, where you do have to be a little more creative and paint the picture for the listener. What's your take on that and your perspective?
One of the things I'm doing now is I teach sports broadcasting at Florida Atlantic University. And one of the things I tell my students is your broadcast shouldn't be math class. Don't turn it into math class. I love statistics. I love statistics as much as anybody, but I like statistics that help tell a story, not just numbers with no context, with no meaning. Okay, that's 102 off the bat. What's average? What's above average? 102 sounds like a lot, but is that a lot? Stanton did 120. This guy did 122. Is 102 good? Is it bad? What does having a 5.7 WAR mean? It sounds good, I guess, but how do you figure WAR? And so I think you lose a lot of people like that. For me,
I watch games almost every night, and I follow a bunch of people on Twitter X. I still don't understand what WRC plus is. I don't know how WAR is calculated.
He asks us every day.
I as someone who's a diehard baseball fan, the fact that I'm getting confused and what I'm watching doesn't match, like my eye test doesn't match what sometimes I'm seeing in the box score. It's confusing, and I understand its role in the game, but for it doesn't feel very baseball at times. And I know I sound like the old guys in Billy Bean's office in the Moneyball scene.
But here's the thing. But you made the point. There's a place for it. And I'm not anti-analytics at all. I think analytics are a great thing. I think they're a great tool to evaluate players, to try to find diamonds in the rough. Okay, this guy's numbers don't look great, but look at his exit velocity. Look at the hard hit rate. Look at the barrel rate. This guy's doing something right. He's having bad luck. There are certain things like that you can deduce using those numbers. And I think they're great tools for general managers and scouting directors and baseball operations people. And I think at times they can help you tell a story on a broadcast. But especially on radio, even more so than on TV, if I'm going to use a stat that I have to explain what the stat means before I give you the stat, you just can't do that. You can't waste people's time on radio. We have to paint the picture of everything going on. So, if somebody does something absolutely extraordinary, and I know that the Michael Wilbon thing was after O'Neill Cruz hit the ball 122 miles per hour, and that was extraordinary. But you got to have the context. That was 122. The major league average is 88 miles per hour. The most anybody's hit this year is 119.7. Whatever the numbers are, you got to give context. Yeah. And again, the broadcast should not be math class. I didn't enjoy math class very much. I enjoyed baseball a lot more.
Yeah, Sunday night baseball is becoming a little bit unwatchable for me because after every pitch, they're giving me the spin rate on a curveball,
the angle,
what about the win probability.
It's like oh, he's in the top 10% of curveball spin rate, but then I look up the guy's ERA and it's over 6. I'm like, who cares? I don't understand. Interesting. Well,
so there's a place for it, but to me, it's not front and center in a broadcast.
Without a doubt. Well, I guess I think Javi and I we definitely want to rip off the Band-Aid, and we are a little biased. We're local guys here in Miami. We're as you know, two frustrated, depressed Marlins fans. You were part of the organization for a long time. You're vocal about your opinion on the team on X, which I think is, from a Marlins fan's perspective, it's a welcome sight to see people or someone who is so prevalent with the organization to be so candid about how they feel, because there is a passionate fan base down here that is totally frustrated. The team has no vision. I think that's my problem with it. Like, there's no discernible future with the organization and what they're doing to compete in, let alone baseball, but the NL East. What, from your perspective, someone who was there, what is the issue? What is the biggest thing holding the organization back right now?
Right now, it's the owner. It's the owner. It's as simple as that. Let's go back to the beginning in October of 2017 when Bruce Sherman bought the team. Jeffrey Loria and David Sampson were not popular. I understand that. They made a lot of mistakes. I understand that. At the end of the day, and I may not be popular for saying this, at the end of the day, they wanted to win. They were trying. They cared about this community. They certainly treated people that worked for them very well. It was a great place to work when those guys were in charge. When people would complain to me about Jeffrey Loria, I would say, I'm going to tell you about the guy who I know, who I've worked for, and generosity and kindness and the things. And the guy's a huge baseball fan. Nobody knew that. But they were so unpopular when they left. The day Bruce Sherman walked in the door, he should have had the greatest honeymoon of any owner in the history of sports, if you think about it. You got a community that wants a winner. Look at the core group of guys he had on that team the day he walked in the door. And you mentioned I've been vocal on Twitter. I also, over the last 14, 15 months, have written a Substack.
Right.
It used to be subscription. Now it's free. I don't write as often now as I did last season. But I've explained a lot of this at great length on Substack. What would have happened if Bruce Sherman walked in the door in 2017? I actually wrote this. I wrote on my Substack sometime in the middle of last season. What if his press conference on the first day had gone like this? We're here. I'm very excited to partner with Derek Jeter, with Michael Hill. We want to win as badly as you do. We know you've had your hearts broken before. Look at these men sitting behind me: Giancarlo Stanton, Christian Yelich, Marcelo Ozuna, JT Realmuto. I took these guys to dinner last night, and I told them it's a new day, and we're going to win, and I want you guys to be a part of this. Let's give this a shot. We're going to bring in a few pieces this offseason and see what we can do. And if it doesn't work, okay. And if people don't come out, okay, then it didn't work. But to blow all those guys out, 3 of the 4 the first offseason, Ozuna, Yelich, and Stanton, then the next year, Realmuto, to never give it a chance was just crushing. And so then you say, okay. And I said, supported this to a certain extent, publicly and privately. Okay, they got a process here. Derek Jeter, a lot of new faces in baseball ops. Let's see what these guys can do. Derek Jeter has never lost anything in his life. I'm going to bet on Derek Jeter bringing the right people and finding a way to win here. I would have thought that was a pretty good bet in 2017, 2018. And I got behind respect the process, hashtag, all that stuff. And they blew one draft after another. They didn't get the return they needed to get when they traded all those guys away. Yes, they got Alcantara in the Ozuna trade.
That's the only person.
Zach Gallen, right? They got Zach Gallen, who they spun for Jazz Chisholm. I'd much rather have Zach Gallen than Jazz Chisholm. They blew that trade. But they blew the return on those guys. Yeah. And so they sneak into the playoffs in the COVID year. Okay. You can put an asterisk next to it or not. Take a step back in 2021. In 2022, and in 2023, they had a lot of things go right. They got back to the playoffs. I think anybody who understands the game says what they did in 2023 is not sustainable. All the one-run wins they had, and all the injuries, and all the collapses by other teams. Going into last year, if you think about it, the Mets were a lock to go to the playoffs. The Cardinals were a lock to go to the playoffs. The Padres were a lock to go to the playoffs. None of those teams did. They all had massive collapses, and the Marlins snuck in the back door. Okay, it wasn't a championship caliber team, but again, you had some pieces. Let's build on that. Yeah. And that's why Kim Ng left, because Kim Ng wanted to build on that, knowing this wasn't a World Series team yet, but we got some pieces here. Let's build on it. But again, Sherman decides we're going to tear this whole thing down. We're going to start from scratch. And the bottom line is he doesn't have the money to put a winning team on the field consistently. That's the bottom line.
So for me, when the sale happened, the saddest part of it all and the biggest issue for me was that they had a multi-billionaire lined up to buy the team who was willing and ready to spend to make the Marlins an immediate contender. It's George Moss, who now owns Inter Miami and the rights to Lionel Messi, and they're in first place in MLS for whatever that's worth.
And I've got the MLS season pass, and I've gotten into soccer the last few years, and I watch Inter Miami religiously because I want to watch the best of the best.
Right, exactly. So I had a huge, and still do, I have a huge problem with what Major League Baseball did seemingly colluding almost and just siding with Jeter and his group rather than approving the sale to someone who wanted to build
local, right? Local.
Yeah. Columbus grad who is ready and willing to spend and is a lifelong baseball fan and wanted to do right by the community. And I speak for myself and my friends and the people who I follow the Marlins closely with. We were excited for George Moss to potentially own the team because we knew that finally for the Florida Miami Marlins, money wasn't going to be an object, that we can compete for free agents, pay our guys when they earn their due. And for lack of a better word, I found it disgusting what Major League Baseball did with Jeter and Sherman. I mean, I have no proof of any of these things. This is optically, as a fan, I'm making a lot of assumptions.
Two things happened, and you're right there. You're dead on with what you're talking about. Two things happened. The team was going to go to whoever brought Derek Jeter on board. Rob Manfred and MLB wanted Derek Jeter involved. They wanted him in ownership. They want baseball to work in South Florida. They were convinced that Derek Jeter was going to be a key part of the puzzle. Derek Jeter said to Bruce Sherman, I want 100% control. He said to Jorge Mas, I want 100% control. Mas said no. Sherman said yes. Sherman then also significantly overpaid for the team. He paid more than Mas was ready to pay. He significantly overpaid for the team. But Sherman gave into what Jeter wanted. That's what got him the team ultimately. And what even Sherman came to realize over the next few years was Derek Jeter was an unbelievable shortstop, a Hall of Fame shortstop, a legendary player. That doesn't mean you should be making every business and every baseball decision. And when Derek Jeter left the Marlins, what has been reported and speculated is, well, Sherman didn't want to spend, and Jeter just said, I've had enough of this. No, that was the one good move Sherman has made. That was Sherman saying, Derek Jeter made all these promises about what the revenues were going to be, what the attendance would be, what we were going to do with a new TV deal and a ballpark naming rights deal. And none of those promises came to fruition, and we're way worse off today. That was him finally saying, Derek, we can't go on like this. He cut ties with Derek. That's why Jeter left. It was not Jeter walking away. And so to Sherman's credit, that was the right thing to do. Now, since then, he hasn't brought in a strong leader who can build a strong front office and do what needs to be done. And on the baseball side, because he is hemorrhaging money, he's got 17 partners. Here's the thing. People say, just sell the team. He cannot sell the team because he paid $1.6 billion for the Marlins, including assumed debt, $1.2 billion, plus he assumed $400 million in debt. He couldn't get much more than half of that if he tried to sell the team today. So he can't sell the team. Well, he should just move the team. Well, he can't move the team because the lease is locked until 2047. He's stuck in a bad spot. He's got partners saying, I'm not going to take a loss if you sell this team now. So he's got to find a way to make it work. Right. So in the short term, that's cutting pennies, cutting corners financially everywhere you can. And that, frankly, is why I'm no longer broadcasting for the team. They didn't want to pay me. They wanted to bring in somebody who was going to make half or even a little bit less than half of what I was making.
Wow.
And, and that's pennies on the dollar compared to other changes they've made. But that's an example of how, people leave. They don't replace them. They cut every corner they can because he's hemorrhaging money right now. He's in a bad spot. So he hires Peter Bendix because now, okay, we're going to win on the cheap because Tampa Bay has done that in the past. This is the guy who's going to do it. Bendix is not calling all the shots right now. Bendix's hands are tied. When people say, why didn't he do more than just bring in Tim Anderson this offseason? That was all he was able to do. Right. And to bring in Tim Anderson, they had to get rid of John Birdie so they could offset the money a little bit, Then they trade a Rise. So this is the second rebuild in 7 years for Bruce Sherman. Who knows how many rebuilds, fire sales it's been. But the biggest challenge they face right now beyond financial is, okay, let's say you want to blow this up and start over again, whether anybody's going to stick with them. And I know you guys are saying you're not. But you don't have a Stanton, a Yelich, an Ozuna, and a Realmuto to trade right now. A Rise was your best chip. Many people feel like they got hosed on that deal. We'll see. Time will tell.
I was
shocked. They don't have another player like that.
When I got the push notification on my phone that they traded him to San Diego, I texted Javi and I assumed they got Ethan Salas at least back. How it's possible that to make the trade so far out in advance of the trade deadline, I just assumed them like, oh, they're going to get him. Like, they're getting it out of the way.
Yeah, the package must have been unbelievable to do it right in early May.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like,
and most people in baseball say it wasn't. I don't profess to know about all these minor leaguers. I'm not going to be the guy who stakes my reputation, how good or bad these guys are going to be. But most people around baseball say they could have done better. And could they have done better waiting until closer to the deadline, waiting until some other team has an injury and really needs a rise?
Take advantage of a desperate Yankees team or whoever, whatever organization.
And the fact they're paying a rise of salary anyway. What was the rush to trade him on May 3rd or whatever the date was? It's a head scratch. And now they don't have any other marquee piece. People say, well, they could trade Jazz Chisholm. Jazz Chisholm's value in the market is not nearly what a small or some percentage of Marlins fans think that it is.
Right. But on X, people are telling me Jazz this season has a higher WAR than Ronald Acuna. So
what does that even mean, Toad?
It means he's more willing to go to war than Ronald Acuna.
They'll get something for Luzardo, but again, none of these pieces they have are worth what those guys they traded in 2017, 2018 are worth. So how do you rebuild? You've really got to nail the draft. You got to crush the draft, and you'd like to think they could spend some money to bring some free agents in here who are going to make an impact, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And I honestly believe the Marlins, who have been in bad spots a lot over 30 plus years, are in a worse spot short-term and long-term today than at any point in their history. And it didn't have to be like this. And that's what's sad. I grew up in this community, like I said, before the Marlins even existed. We dreamed that one day we'd have Major League Baseball in this city. They had 3 million people the first season at the football stadium. Crappy weather. They drew 3 million people that first year. Those people are still here.
I earned my sunburns in the upper deck of Joe Robbie Stadium. Yeah, pro player, Joe Robbie, Dolphin Stadium,
Land Shark.
Yeah, Land Shark. You name it. They called it.
Glenn, let me ask you something in terms of Marlins, and it seems like Toad and I go back and forth a lot. It's like being a Marlins fan is just a series of gut punches, right? Blow it up in '98 after winning it in in '97, blowing it up again, between '04 and '06, and then the new ownership group blows it up 17, 18, and I think the biggest gut punch, and coming from a place where he was Miami, right? I thought the Marlins had so much momentum, and then all of a sudden Jose Fernandez tragically passes. What was that like? What was the psyche of the organization at that point in time when it seemed like they had such a good group and a good vibe amongst that team? I don't know the interpersonal, how it looked like in the clubhouse, but it seemed like that team was just right on the cusp. How was that, those months and that year after Jose passed away?
You nailed it, Javi. You really nailed it. That was the turning point for this franchise. And that was the moment when Jeffrey Loria decided, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to sell the team. And a year later, he had sold the team. And again, not that Jeffrey Loria was, Mickey Arison, whoever you want to point at as the ultimate owner in this market. Mickey Arison maybe seems to be that guy. Jeffrey made a lot of mistakes, but he cared and he wanted to win and he cared about this community. The Jose thing, I first met Jose literally the day he signed his first pro contract. He was the first round pick. He came to the stadium to sign the contract, do a press conference. I did a pregame interview with him. Saw him pitch in the minors a couple of times. Did a spring training interview with him. The year before he wound up making his major league debut in 2013 when he was supposed to start the year at AA. He was as special and as unique a guy as I've ever been around in baseball. And when I talk about 3+ decades in the game, the two guys who above all others, I want to say 3 guys above all others for me, 2 in San Diego were Tony Gwynn and Trevor Hoffman, and in Miami, Jose Fernandez. To see what this game meant to him, to see the passion that he brought to the ballpark, not even just every day when he pitched, every single day, the work ethic, the drive to be the best, the enthusiasm, the way he wasn't afraid to, let it all out on the field, seeing him get a big strike at the end of the 7th inning and pump the fist and point at his mom in the seats behind home plate. Then when the closer's in to close it out, pounding on the padding in front of the dugout and the biggest cheerleader. So for that to end the way that it did was absolutely devastating. If there was remotely a saving grace, you talk about the months after that, it was that it happened with a week to go in the season.
Yeah.
And that last week, you talk about like walking in your sleep. Everybody was just walking in their sleep for that last week. Nobody wanted to play. Nobody wanted to be there. Everybody had to get home. We were very fortunate. It was the very end of the year because then people could go home, be with their families, be separated from it all. It was a very close clubhouse, as you said. And the next year, it was different. And those same guys were still here, but it was different. And at the end of the day, I really feel like Yelich and Ozuna and Realmuto and Stanton and those guys were ultimately better off going somewhere else because it just was never going to be the same for anybody who had been in Jose's orbit, had been part of that.
Right.
And so that's why, in a sense, the clean break needed to be made, but that's not why it was made. You know, Bruce Sherman couldn't have cared less about any of that stuff. But it was, you know, unlike anything that I've been a part of in my life to see it happen to somebody who was so young and so vivacious. And I'll say forever, he will go down as the greatest what if in the history of Major League Baseball. What if Jose Fernandez had pitched another 10, 15 years? How many Cy Youngs, how many records would he have broken? He would have done it all. And would it have been in a Marlins uniform? We'll never know. Would it have been as a Yankee or Dodger? We'll never know.
The answer to that question is probably not, but you know.
But he loved it here so much. And I know, you know, not guys aren't looking to give hometown discounts and stuff, but Miami was special to Jose.
Yeah.
And I think there was a chance. I wouldn't guarantee it, but I think there was a chance they would have found a way. And his relationship with Jeffrey Loria was such that I think there would have been a chance. You know, Loria gave Stanton $352 million or $325, whatever it was. I think there was a chance, and we'll never know. But that was the ultimate gut punch for this organization, no doubt.
Glenn, you've worked with a handful of big names. One that comes to mind for me is Dave Van Horn. Do you still communicate with him? For me, and probably for Javi as well, you two are synonymous with Florida Marlins baseball for us in our formative years as fans. I'm just curious if you still talk with him, if you guys discuss the team, and if he's still paying attention to baseball overall.
We text a lot. We talk occasionally. We don't generally talk about the Marlins. He kind of, you know, he preceded me out the door by a year. And he really kind of broke all ties at that point. He just didn't want to watch, didn't want to listen. And I completely understood it at the time.
Right.
And I understood it better a year later when I made my way out the door. So when we talk, it's not about the Marlins. It's about families and what people are up to and other people in the industry and things happening in broadcasting. Actually, we're talking about getting together for lunch sometime really soon. We got to do that. He lives up in Palm Beach County. It's not easy, but we're going to make it happen again soon. So we are still in very close contact. He's first class. You know, but the point you make, Toad, again, not to jump on Bruce Sherman, but I'm going to jump on Bruce Sherman here and the people he's brought in. You know, I bet you love Rich Walsh and Tommy Hutton also. Growing up a Marlins fan.
I want Van Horn back. I want Geffner back. I want Rich Waltz. Just there was a different. Javi and I spoke about this a couple episodes ago. There was a different energy, and I hate to reuse this word a lot, but just a different vibe around the organization in those times. We talk about the teams a lot when we were in high school, that, you know, the Ugla, Hanley, Ramirez teams, that they
08-09.
Yeah, yep. They weren't the best, but they were competitive. They were fun to watch. The broadcast on the radio and television gave you a reason to tune in outside of what was on the field too. Like I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes in a cold sweat, screaming, and his name is Dan Ugla. Like, it's just
right.
It's just a part
those
of me.
Those were great years.
Those are my, like, I don't remember 97 at all. Obviously I was 6 years old, but 03 was a huge part of my life because it was during the time I was playing baseball daily too. So, but my favorite Marlins years were the Jorge Cantu.
Came in 08.
Yeah.
That was my first year. My first 2 years, 08 and 09, are my favorite Marlins years, hands down, no question. What a great bunch of guys. there were some good players. Look at that pitching staff with Josh Johnson and Ricky Nolasco and Anibal Sanchez. And you go around the horn, that lineup. I know you guys have talked about the infield. They all hit 25 plus home runs. Can't two wind up with 29. And I remember being in the lobby of the hotel in New York the last day of that season. He was sitting on 29, and I talked to him about it. And he said, I really want to hit it so bad today. And he didn't do it. But everybody hit 25 plus in that infield. Everybody hit 30 except Cantu at 29. But that was a good lineup. Those teams, they won 85 and 87 games those 2 years. And unfortunately, that was right in the middle of the Phillies' great run, where they won the division 5 years in a row, and they were at their peak. But those teams were so much fun, such good guys, great guys to talk to.
In that football stadium that you called games, you witnessed Halliday's perfect game. You called that. But we often we all are big hockey fans on this podcast as well. I'm sorry for Petey's Bruins, but
of course, I knew it was coming.
we've discussed as well chippiness and fighting being back in baseball. It's been an early theme. So you called, to bring this together, you called Halliday's perfect game, but to me, maybe the more memorable moment you got to witness was a fight. It was yes, it took the words out of my mouth. Gabby Sanchez beating the crap out of Niger Morgan.
That was fun. And Volstad was the pitcher, and Niger charged the mound. Niger had bowled over Brett Hayes, who was the Marlins catcher, and had a pitch come a little bit too close to him in the next at bat, or maybe it was the next game even. And he went after Chris Volstad, and Gabby Sanchez, never known for his speed, and Niger Morgan was. but Gabby beat Niger to the mound and clotheslined him, and the rest is history. And Gabby will tell you he gets asked about it a lot to this day. That was a great moment. No question about that. Certainly a memorable Marlins moment.
All right, Geff, real quick for me, a lot of good memories. Toad just brought up the Halliday perfect game. Ichiro's 3,000th hit. Obviously, not broadcasting the 04 World Series, but broadcasting the 07 World Series with Castiglione. Favorite memory in the booth for you, or all-time moment for you in the booth, of all the things that you've seen or talked about?
Being a part of a World Series championship in 07, and Joe Castiglione made the final call, the final out. I was in the clubhouse to get post-game interviews for the final out in 07. But being a part of that, Dustin Pedroia hit a home run against the Indians in Game 7 of the ALCS that year that I called. It kind of iced that game, kind of won the pennant. That's a moment that stands out for me. Mike Lowell hit a home run in Colorado in Game 4 in 07 that stands out as kind of a moment that iced the World Series that year that I was able to call. Ichiro's 3,000th hit was really cool. I was very close with Tony Gwynn, and it was there for Tony's 3,000th hit in San Diego. Didn't call it, but was there for that. And to watch Ichiro every day and to be on the mic when he had his 3,000th hit in Colorado was really cool. So as far as favorite moments, but the moment when people will sometimes ask me, what's the one that you'll never forget? I'm going to come back to Jose and the game after Jose passed away. And I would never want to relive that broadcast, but that entire broadcast that night is the first one I'll always think of games I've called because of the emotion in the ballpark that night. And the way the Mets and Marlins players came together pregame, and D. Gordon hit the leadoff home run, after paying tribute to Jose. Again, for like the fourth time with you guys, I'm getting chills.
Hey, Geff, you notice this every time. It's every time I usually ask you a question.
Come on.
Geff got goosebumps 4 times. I've spoken 4 times here today. So
you're like Barabara Walters. I don't know. She would make everybody cry.
Thanks, Barbara.
But that Jose night, I wish it never would have happened. But that's a game a lot of people will still mention when they talk about different games they listen to on the radio. How we got through that night, I'll never, ever know. But and then that whole final week, just kind of feeling as though you have to help Marlins fans through this. And not to get over it or to get past it, but just through it. And we all kind of went through it together. That was a crazy time. But that, more than any other, stands out of any game I've ever called.
That's a tremendous encapsulation moment, I think, Glenn. And, obviously we've had the privilege of chatting with you here tonight. And I think play-by-play was Toad and I were talking about this off air. It's such a special, especially in baseball. I mean, I can't really attest to it in other sports because I just haven't had, I don't listen to a whole lot of play-by-play, but radio and baseball, I feel like you have such a responsibility. I know you and I talked about this in the booth, but you have such a responsibility to be the eyes and ears for the listeners. You are the vessel for us to feel like we are at that game, right? You have the ability to see, hear, and bring us into that moment. And we always, Toad and I especially, enjoyed listening to you, Glenn. I know you're onto new things. You got a podcast, Crooked Numbers. So you guys get the opportunity. Our listeners, please go check it out. Crooked Numbers podcast by Glenn Geffner. You mentioned your Substack. I'm going to shout it out too. Glenn Geffner's View from the Bleachers. Follow Glenn on Twitter. Glenn, if you want to talk about your podcast, this is a space. Give our listeners what they can expect to hear from you. I don't know the exact cadence, but what they can expect from Crooked Numbers.
Yeah, Crooked Numbers is my way. I love stats. I love stats that tell stories. I love baseball history and trivia. And what I try to do, it comes out every Friday. It's a weekly podcast, only about 25 to 30 minutes. So it's not like you got to walk your dog 4 times to get through it or go through an entire workout. It's short attention span. What I try to do is I try to take things that are happening in Major League Baseball right now in 2024 and connect them to stories and players from the past or things that are happening in society today, and to connect them to things happening in the past. So, just for a couple of examples, on the most recent episode, you've got Shota Imanaga, the great Japanese pitcher with the Cubs, having a great start to his career. Yoshinobu Yamamoto with the Dodgers, great Japanese pitcher. This is the 60th anniversary of the first Japanese-born major leaguer, Masanori Murakami. So I told his story in relation to these two great Japanese sensations who are pitching now. Last week I think Friday was National Brothers Day. I went through some of the great brothers combinations in Major League history and statistics, and I had a cool George Brett, Ken Brett thing as part of that. When Luis Ariz got traded to the Padres, and there was a lot of talk comparing him to Tony Gwynn, I did a lot on Tony Gwynn on that episode. Just numbers and stories that people might not know. So it's not Marlins related at all. There will occasionally be Marlins related stories. It's an MLB podcast. If you like trivia, if you like stats, stories, if you want to learn more about the history of the game, I've had stuff going back to the 1800s on this podcast, talking about literally, who was the guy. Everybody knows that Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's record and that Barry Bonds broke Hank Aaron's record. Whose record did Babe Ruth break?
Whoa,
and I told the story of Roger Connor.
Whoa, hold on.
Told you know that one?
No. What was Babe Ruth's war?
That I don't know. And I'm sure he didn't know either. But, when the Marlins were off to the awful start, I said, okay, it's been an awful start for the Marlins. And the Rockies and White Sox are off to awful starts. But what would it take to have the worst season in Major League history? And I told the story of the 1899 Cleveland Spiders. So it's stuff like that. And like I said, short attention span. I hope people will check it out. Crooked Numbers.
We definitely will. We'll shoot that out, Glenn. I know I speak on behalf of Toad here. We are honored to have you on the Bullpen Mafia.
Please come back, Geff. Seriously.
Anytime.
If you want to chat with Barabara Walters, I know Petey will be more than glad to get you on the show.
Don't make me cry.
But Glenn, thank you so much for being an institution down here in South Florida. And from 2 Marlins fans, we really appreciate your service to this organization and for bringing baseball into our living rooms and our daily lives. So, Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. We hope to have you back again soon.
Anytime. I love what you guys are doing. Keep up the great work.
Nice, Geff.